Well, I just finished talking about Supper's Ready versus Close to the Edge. You can find the video right there. So I decided to go a little bit deeper into the album that birthed Supper's Ready. So yeah, I figured it's time to take a look at a classic album, and let's do this. Foxtrot by Genesis. So, Foxtrot is the fourth studio album from the legendary progressive rock band of Genesis. This was released, I believe, in 1972. Yep, 1972. Still got it. It's not necessarily my favorite Genesis album. That's not to discredit it at all. That's just to say that the other albums that they've put out are but this is definitely one of the best albums of all time. Love this album. Love this album. I love how it's structured. I love that we've got the typical Genesis structure of bombastic opening track, really smooth and mellow second track to give us a little bit of a breather into the third track, which is just bananas, off the wall crazy. And then we do something a little bit different. We have possibly one of the most interesting tracks that Genesis has ever done. Then we come into the second side with just a little bit of a Steve Hackett guitar work, which just then leads us into the big crowning jewel track, which is Supper's Ready. So I love the structure of this album. It couldn't have been structured any better. And the songs that they found to structure this album with, fantastic. Watcher of the Skies was probably the first track I ever heard from Genesis. Well, I mean, outside of the big radio-friendly ones, but this was the first track that I distinctly remember of being Genesis. Opening up with Tony Banks on that mellotron, just that like, it's like when I say something sets the atmosphere, bam, that's what I mean. It really sets the atmosphere and sets the tone for this album. This is a dark album, and Watcher of the Skies definitely does that. I have heard it said that Supper's Ready was like the big revolutions or apocalypse of the Bible, and then Watcher of the Skies being the aftermath. So kind of like starting at the end aspect of this slightly omniscient being watching over the creatures. And so it's less of us looking up to the skies as us watching the skies, but more of like the watcher of the skies, like somebody up in the skies that watches, doesn't have any influence and can't really do anything, and then watching the atrocities that are going on. And this is reflected within the tone of the music as well, because if it was more so us watching the skies and basking in the glory, it'd be a little bit more optimistic, I think. Whereas it's much more of a looking on almost in horror. And I love the build-up that we have to it, that like it's very meaty in that sense. It's almost like pseudo-metal before it was ever kind of a thing. And then once we get over that hump, we have that Peter Gabriel bursting onto the scene being like, Watcher of the Skies, Watcher of all. Okay, that's falsetto. I'm never going to do that again. But yeah, he bursts onto the scene, and I mean, you gotta listen to this song live. You really do. It's the costume changes, it's the headgear thing, it's him always like scanning the area and the neon eyelids. It's just then we come into Timetable, and Timetable is just a classic. It's very subtle. We just have Tony Banks again on that piano work that comes in with Peter Gabriel's singer-songwriter, just melts, and it's a little bit longer. It's almost like For Absent Friends, the same fruit from that tree, but it's a little bit more. They give us a little bit more because it is almost 5 minutes in time. So I love that track. I love the perfect contrast, because where Watcher of the Skies was so big and so dark and so menacing, Timetable is much smaller. It's much more personable. It's much more intimate. Then we come into Get 'Em Out by Friday. I've always had a really strange time with Get 'Em Out by Friday. Like, I've got mixed feelings about Get 'Em Out by Friday. I love the story behind it of, the zoning laws within building constructions, of the genetic changing and authority over humans. If we can genetically alter humans to be 4 feet in height, we can then change the zoning laws to make apartments smaller, which we can then cram more people into. I love the metaphor of all that as well. I love, like, the oppression of the higher ups and the rent controls and kind of this battle between the renters and the rentees, and the amount of symbolism and metaphors that we found within this is really, really fun. The music itself is definitely quirky and weird and fun. Something that they've dabbled with in the past, but this one is almost like notching it up a little bit more. So that I still kind of, it's probably, for me at least, it's the low point on the album. And I mean, it's a really high low point, but yeah, there's no real big crescendo on this track. There's no big finale. There's no big like gold nugget moment. It's just kind of this journey that we're on. Then we get into the Can Ulity and the Coastliners. Can Ulity is one of the most interesting tracks of all of Genesis, and kind of started the whole formula that was followed with One for the Vine, for the Burning Rope. I definitely found this formula very pleasing to me. But yeah, I really, really love this track, and I love how different it is from all the other songs that had come before it. It's much more positive. It's much more optimistic in music, in tone, in lyrics. Really thought that was really fun. Then we come into Horizons, and Horizons is just Steve Hackett laying out the groundwork before we get into Supper's Ready. Oh boy, Supper's Ready, the staple of any Genesis discography. The big song, the big 23-minute, just... This is what catapulted Genesis onto the progressive rock stage. Like, if they weren't already on it, which they were already on, this just blew them down the doors. And it's very interesting of how the song came to be. The first 10 minutes was, as I had already mentioned in the previous video that I left up there, when I was talking specifically about Supper's Ready, the first about 10 minutes or so is very much the musical box 2.0. It starts off with the 3 harmonizing guitar works with Peter Gabriel singing around it. I love how the song really builds and takes its time. And it is a build to the first crescendo, and then it kind of tapers off a little bit. Another build to the big crescendo and tapers off a little bit. So the first, like, again, 3 movements, I think it is. It isn't until we get to Willow Farm that the song really does a big shift. And that's where we go from, like, Musical Box 2.0 to Supper's Ready. Within Willow Farm, where we have that, a flower, and it's just a, if you go down to Willow Farm. And that's where it just blows everybody, like, whoa, what are we listening to? This is crazy. Like, I believe originally this was just going to be its own little oddball song, kind of like Harold the Barreled from Nursery Crimes. But no, they decided to plunk it right in the middle of Supper's Ready to be the centerpiece. It's so fun, it's so different, it's so boppin', it's very bombastic, and it sets the stage for the next half of the track. We then... the whole thing falls apart, and then we have that next climb to the big finale, which is that the evil and dark and just bestial apocalypse in 9/8, or maybe it's 8/9. My dyslexia again, where that play out between Michael Rutherford on the bass keeping that rhythm, Phil Collins on the drum doing some of the best drumming I have ever heard to date. Like, he could have just very easily stayed in his own little box and not really done anything all that much outside of keeping that really interesting time signature, but he just really explores the territory and just flies. And then, of course, we have Tony Banks over top of it all doing his noodling away, and I love how that's all set up and just continues to build. And then even when we reach that first plateau, they continue to build even after that plateau. And it isn't until we get Peter Gabriel back on there, and that's one of my favorite kind of little trivia pieces, is when Tony Banks is talking about his keyboard work. He's like, I put out this really great keyboard work, and it's building, and then Peter comes on and just starts singing over top of it. It's like, no, it was so good. Why did you have to come on here? But yeah, his lyrical styles within this, tying everything together, making it all kind of tie into the whole apocalypse part of the Book of Revelations. It's so beautiful. And then we come right back into that beginning sequence when all of it's tied back together. We get that final crescendo, and it just plays out brilliantly. Perfect way to end this album. So yeah, overall, as I mentioned, I'm just going to get right to it. Foxtrot by Genesis is an absolute masterpiece.
We're not worthy! We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
I mean, how can it not be? This album sparked so much love within the progressive rock community that kind of set the stage. Like, it set a precedent of what music could be at that point. And it said, we don't necessarily have to be ridiculously experimenting beyond all recognition. We can experiment within a sandbox that provides amazingly catchy music that's going to stand the test of time. And that's what it did. So that's it for Foxtrot by Genesis. What did you guys think? Do you love it? Do you love it? Let me know of your own thoughts about this album by commenting down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.
We watch in reverence as Narcissus is turned to a flower. A flower?